FedEx, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, just issued a big economic warning for 2024, cutting their revenue outlook due to a difficult demand environment that has now resulted in 10 consecutive quarters of decline in U.S. shipping volume, which is an ominous sign for the overall health of the economy in 2024. There's lots of people right now who think that we've averted recession and that we're going to enter an economic boom, but this data from FedEx suggests otherwise. Because we are in a freight recession unlike any other in history. Trucking companies right now are in dark times. This is not a good time to be in the trucking industry. Most recently, Yellow Corporation, one of the nation's oldest and largest trucking companies, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in August, laying off 30,000 employees. So a lot of these trucks that you see driving around America, they're driving half empty because the consumer demand simply isn't there for durable goods anymore. Americans, they bought a lot of stuff. During the pandemic, they took the stimulus checks and they bought a lot of goods. But now, entering 2024, they don't need to buy the goods or they don't have the money to buy the goods, which is causing big problems across many sectors in the economy, particularly for a company like FedEx, who has experienced a colossal collapse in shipping and freight volumes, which is what I'm showing on this graph, everyone. Through November 2023, the most recent earnings report, FedEx shipped 21 million pounds of freight per day, which is a massive 30% lower than it was in the same period prior to the pandemic, when freight volumes were at over 30 million pounds per day. Now we're down to 21 million pounds per day. You can see there was a slight uptick in the last quarter due to the holiday shopping season, which was a seasonal uptick. Don't be surprised if in 2024, these shipping volumes drop by even more. And one just has to wonder if eventually we're going to see these warning signs, like in the trucking and freight industry, eventually result in widespread layoffs once companies stop hoarding labor. With data from FreightWaves showing that the number of trucking carriers in America is at 363,000 right now, which is way up from its pre-pandemic level. You can see the number of fleets is still up by about 30% from what it was before the pandemic. So what's likely to happen is that the number of trucks and truck carriers and truckers and associated jobs in the warehousing sector are likely going to need to decline closer to this trend line before we see an equilibrium in the industry. And that situation speaks to something that I call kind of the illusion of disbelief about this economic downturn. I think a lot of people, a lot of businesses, they recognize the struggle that's going on in the economy right now. They see their sales going down. They see gloomy times ahead. However, they haven't yet hit the point where they're ready to quit. With a very similar situation playing out in real estate, everyone. Real estate and trucking, they're more similar than you think in terms of how those industries are behaving, particularly with the number of realtors in America. The number of realtors, it skyrocketed during the pandemic, much like the number of trucking carriers skyrocketed. You can see the number of realtors in America peaked at around 1.6 million in late 2022 and has since gone down to 1.57 million, so about a 2% decline in the number of realtors. Realtors have started to quit. However, we know that a lot more realtors will quit into the future. The number of home sales per realtor is now literally at the lowest level on record, according to data from the National Association of Realtors. So the average realtor only sells 2.2 single-family homes in a year, while there's 1.6 million realtors. So we know what that means, everyone. The number of realtors, it's going to collapse at some point. And the takeaway from this, for you guys out there who are trying to understand the economy and the housing market and the stock market in 2024, is that there is likely more pain to come. Because there's lots of sectors of the economy which are struggling to make money, which are in a recession, but just for some reason, we haven't seen the capitulation yet. And I believe the capitulation will come at some point. And I believe that a lot of the people who are thinking somehow that this economy has just magically dodged a broader downturn, I think a lot of these people have their heads in the clouds. Because, it's easy to kind of say, hey, the Federal Reserve is going to cut interest rates in 2024 and, the stock market's up and just everything's going to be good as a result. But when you hone in and look at specific industries, you see the underlying problems in the economy that resulted from all the money printing during the pandemic, the artificially low interest rates that created a lot of dislocation and a lot of excess capacity in certain sectors, too many trucks, too many realtors, and we're just now seeing that deleveraging start. And as that deleveraging continues in 2024, I suspect we're likely to see a pullback on consumer spending as more people run out of excess savings, as more people end up being laid off. Unfortunately, I think consumer spending is likely to decline, even if the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates 3 or 4 times. That's not likely to move the needle for the average American who's been struggling with 2 to 3 years of inflation. And I'm concerned about what the ramifications are going to be on both the housing market and the stock market. And I'm going to talk about the housing market in 1 second, everyone, about some of my predictions for 2024. But let's talk about actually the stock market first. Because what's going on in the stock market right now is wild, folks. It's crazy. The S&P 500, it's now up to 4,800. That's a record, everyone. The S&P 500, look at this. It's just vaulted back up over the last year, and really, I mean, over the last decade. You can see the stock market bubble has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And the reason I call it a stock market bubble is because the prices of stocks are not supported by the fundamentals underlying these companies, particularly the earnings of these companies, because the prices, the amount people are paying for stocks, has vaulted up much faster than the growth in earnings, which you can see very clearly displayed on this graph, which goes back all the way to 1900, 120 years of data here, folks. And we're looking at the cyclically adjusted PE ratio of the stock market. This is data that comes from Robert Shiller, an economist at Yale. And you can see the cyclically adjusted PE ratio, or CAPE, is now at 32 times earnings, which you can see is well above the long-term average of 18 times earnings. So this is signaling stock market bubble. And what you can see is that we've actually really kind of been in a stock market bubble almost perpetually the last 20 years due to the Fed's artificially low interest rate environment and all that money printing. And so if you're someone buying into the stock market today, it's important to understand that the valuations today are extremely high compared to their long-term historical levels, which suggests there could be a lot of downside if this economy finally tilts into the real recession everyone's been anticipating over the last couple of years in 2024. Now, of course, the economy could avoid this recession. That's a possibility. Maybe the trucking companies and the realtors and all the other segments of the economy that are struggling, maybe they just hold on, and maybe no one lays off anyone, and maybe they just lose money, and they lose money for multiple years and then weather the storm. That's a possibility. It's just hard for me to believe that that's actually going to happen, because it never really does happen that way. Everyone, at some point, when consumers and businesses deplete their savings and deplete their reserves enough, they say, hey, this isn't worth it anymore. Time to cut back the spending, time to get leaner, time to lower the employee headcount. And to be clear, we're not at that point yet, because the unemployment rate is 3.7%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the most recent data. So the unemployment rate is still historically low. However, what I would like to point you to, folks, is the history of how unemployment rate can skyrocket very, very fast, particularly after the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates. That's what these blue bars indicate. These blue bars show the first time the Federal Reserve cut interest rates in the interest rate cycle in these previous periods. And you can see that the Fed tends to cut interest rates right at kind of the bottom of the unemployment rate. Right when the unemployment rate is lowest is actually when the Fed cuts rates, and then right after that is when the unemployment rate spikes. And so right now, the betting markets are predicting that the Fed will first cut interest rates in March 2024, in a couple months. And so a lot of people are interpreting these Fed rate cuts, which are very likely to happen in my opinion, as saying, oh, the economy is just going to boom. Everything's going to get better when the Fed cuts rates. But history says that is not the case. History actually says it's the opposite. When the Federal Reserve moves to cut interest rates, that's typically the sign that things are going to get worse in the economy. And I don't want to be too negative, everyone. I don't want to be too bearish, but I feel like with all the crazy kind of bullish narratives in the mainstream, I have to anchor you guys down on what this history actually says. But I think a lot of people are potentially in a position where they're going to make a big mistake. They're going to buy into this idea of Fed cutting rates meaning a recovery, when the history says, hold on a minute, that's not very likely. Now, what about the housing market, everyone? I know most of my viewers here, you subscribe to me because of your interest in real estate and the housing market. And what are we seeing now for 2024 in terms of home prices, home buyer demand, mortgage rates. What are some of my predictions for 2024? Well, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the fact that mortgage rates have dropped. Mortgage rates have gone from 8% to 6.5%, which has improved affordability in the market. That drop in mortgage rates is causing a lot of realtors, a lot of professional economists to think that housing is going to boom in 2024. At the very least, home prices are going to continue going up. However, the early returns on this decline in mortgage rates are not very good. Home buyers don't seem very compelled to jump back into the market with rates at 6.5% compared to 8%. Because the mortgage applications to buy a house, everyone, yes, they've recovered from their dismally low levels of October, but right now they're kind of settling at a level that's 19% below what they were a year ago. So the mortgage application index was 149 right before Christmas. That's 19% below where it was in 2022. And it's about 40% below where it was prior to the pandemic. So this is still really low levels of home buyer demand. At the same time, other leading indicators are also showing that buyer demand is still very, very sluggish, even with this drop in mortgage rates. With Redfin's Home Buyer Demand Index, which tracks requests for home tours and home buying services to Redfin, that's down 7% year over year through the middle of December, and it's down almost 35% from where it was in 2021. So we're not seeing a recovery there. However, we are actually seeing a significant increase in listing consults with Redfin, which means more sellers being interested in listing their house actually due to this drop in mortgage rates, which is good news for you guys as a home buyer out there in 2024, because we're seeing the interest rates come down. We're seeing more sellers now interested in listing their homes, but we're not really seeing like a big rebound in buyer demand, at least not yet, which paints the picture that in the spring of 2024, we could see a big spike in inventory, and we could see a spike in price cuts and price reduction. And the trend that I'm really looking at in the 2024 housing market is the differences in how home prices move in different cities. Because I think there's going to be lots of regional variation. I think there's going to be lots of home price volatility in 2024. And next week, I will be doing a video for my channel members here on YouTube, giving my predictions for the 10 cities where home prices will go up the most in 2024 and the 10 cities where home prices will go down the most. So if you're someone who wants that additional insight, hit the join button below and become a channel member. The cost is $5 a month if you register on your computer. If you do it on your phone, it's $7 a month. So I would encourage you guys, do it on your computer so you can get the $5 a month, which grants you access to one exclusive video per week where I cover data on the housing market and economy even more in depth. So hit that join button below to get those weekly videos into your inbox and to see next week's video when I cover the 10 cities where prices are going to go up the most in 2024 and the 10 cities where prices will go down the most.